The most crucial task in studying psychology is to rid oneself of three types of thinking: intuitive thinking, egocentric thinking, and mechanical thinking. Starting today, I will dedicate 3 lectures to helping you completely transform your way of thinking. The 3 monkeys and the bananas experiment. Firstly, I would like to introduce a classic psychology experiment featuring 3 monkeys who love bananas. Psychologists placed the 3 monkeys in a cage with a bunch of bananas hanging in the center. They established a rule: if any monkey tried to take the bananas, the other 2 monkeys would be shocked. Soon, the monkeys learned that taking the bananas was a troublesome behavior for the group, so whenever one monkey attempted to take the bananas, the other 2 would stop it or even beat it up. Over time, when all 3 monkeys learned this rule, psychologists replaced one of the old monkeys with a new one. You can predict 2 outcomes. First, the new monkey would try to take the bananas in the center of the cage. Second, the 2 old monkeys would stop or even attack the new monkey. Even without the electric shock punishment, the new monkey quickly realized that taking bananas is taboo. The experiment continued in this way, with new monkeys replacing old ones, but the custom of not taking the bananas remained in the group of monkeys. Anyone who dared to take the bananas would be attacked by the other 2 monkeys, even though the new monkey did not know why the bananas could not be taken. You may ask, why is this so? Psychologists say that this is the origin of social norms. How can we understand these social norms? On the one hand, in order to survive, we have stored countless rules and ways of thinking in our minds. These rules can quickly and effectively guide our behavior. For example, you may compliment someone's clothes, but not point out the piece of green vegetable stuck in their teeth. On the other hand, we rarely explore the logic behind each rule and the situations in which it applies. We simply apply these inherited and solidified thinking patterns to the rapidly evolving society, leading us to make one foolish judgment after another. For example, if I ask you a question now, when you buy a lottery ticket, do you think the probability of winning is higher for the number 55,555 or 34821? Obviously, your intuition tells you that you would not think the probability of 55,555 is higher because it sounds too coincidental. However, statistically speaking, the probability of winning for both numbers is the same. There are many examples like this in our lives. In 2002, Nobel laureate in economics and psychologist Kahneman said, "People assume that their thinking is rational, but most of their behavior is irrational. We do many things that we think are reasonable, logical, and rational, but in reality, we often rely on our intuition." The illusion of rationality. What are some common irrational behaviors? If you still think that you are rational most of the time, you may want to try the following test. There is a professor named Nehru who works at a university in the United States. He is proficient in Sanskrit and subscribes to the journal Indian Culture. He writes poetry at home every night, and his hobby is collecting Buddha statues. Now, I want to ask you, do you think this professor is more likely to be a professor of Indian literature or a cell biologist? I believe you would guess that he is a professor of Indian literature, right? This question is too simple, and he has a typical characteristic of a professor of Indian literature. Think about it. How many cell biologists are proficient in Sanskrit? How many cell biologists go home to write poetry and collect Buddha statues? However, in fact, if you guess that he is a cell biologist, your chances of winning are higher. You may wonder why. In fact, the reason is simple. There are only 100 professors of Indian literature in the entire United States, but there are 50,000 cell biologists, which is the basic probability. Although Professor Nehru's characteristics match those of a professor of Indian literature by 90%, and only 5% match those of a cell biologist, when you multiply this matching degree by the basic probability mentioned earlier, you will find that the probability of Professor Nehru being a cell biologist is 2.7 times that of being a professor of Indian literature. This is a mistake we often make, called ignoring the base rate. Of course, you can say that basic probability requires some knowledge accumulation, and I can make more rational judgments with more knowledge and evidence. Then I will tell you another classic psychology experiment. Imagine this scenario: a powerful country invades a weak country. Do you think the United States, as the world police, should intervene militarily? Psychologists took this question to a university in the United States for investigation. They randomly divided American college students into two groups. One group was told that refugees from the small country were fleeing by train, while the other group was told that refugees were fleeing by ship. You see, the means of escape, whether by train or by ship, has nothing to do with whether the United States should intervene militarily. However, the result of the experiment was that those college students who were told that refugees were fleeing by train were more supportive of the United States military intervention. Why is this? Because the scene of refugees fleeing by train reminded American college students of the situation of Jewish refugees fleeing by train during World War II. The United States military intervention in World War II saved Europe and civilization, and was a just and glorious war. The scene of refugees fleeing by water reminded American college students of the situation of Vietnamese refugees fleeing during the Vietnam War, which is generally considered a mistake by the U.S. government. You see, seemingly irrelevant information can silently influence our decisions. Both politicians and businessmen will use seemingly irrelevant information to influence our judgments. For instance, during their presidential campaigns, Clinton, who opposed the Iraq War, would liken it to the Vietnam War, thereby evoking the public's aversion to war. On the other hand, Bush, who supported the Iraq War, would assert that Saddam was like Hitler, thus arousing the public's sense of justice in overthrowing tyranny. As a result, the public's attention was distorted towards emotional and intuitive thinking, rather than analyzing events objectively and rationally. Replace intuitive thinking with scientific rational thinking. From this, one can easily draw the conclusion that humans are naturally inclined to think with intuitive reasoning. However, if humans are so prone to making foolish decisions, how were we able to land on the moon and achieve so many wonders? As a psychologist, I believe there are two reasons for this. Firstly, just like the three monkeys I mentioned earlier, intuitive thinking formed in a specific context was correct and efficient in that context. Imagine living in a small tribe 5,000 years ago. If you saw a large, striped object in the jungle, you wouldn't need to think about whether it was a tiger or not. You would need to run for your life. In this situation, intuitive thinking can help us make quick and efficient decisions. Therefore, intuitive thinking itself is not the problem. The problem is that our society has undergone rapid changes. Especially in the past 100 years, the breakdown of traditional family structures, the bankruptcy of self-sufficient economic models, and the rapid development of communication and transportation have made our accumulated and inherited intuitive thinking from the past few thousand years no longer applicable. Secondly, we landed on the moon not by intuitive thinking, but by scientific rational thinking. By following scientific laws and using experimental data, we continuously corrected our mistakes and eventually landed on the moon. However, once we return to our daily lives, we become dependent on intuitive thinking again and do not ask ourselves from time to time, what are we doing? How did I react in this situation? Why did I react that way? Are there any other options?